see, there's a small rectangular balloon that's directionalizing apex pressure of this larger balloon that lines up with this green dot. And why that's important is because that's going to tell them how to place the band in the procedural room. So instead of having a large balloon that's going to give you diffuse pressure all over the wrist, you're just getting pinpoint precise pressure, which is why it's really important that this band only gets placed in the room, procedural room, with the sheath still stabilizing the patient's radial artery. So the ideal site for a puncture for a radial artery procedure is about 2 to 3 centimeters above the patient's flexor crease. So what they'll do is if X marks the spot for where they're entering the patient's skin, you want to take your green dot right here and line it up 1 to 2 millimeters proximal, so you're getting the pressure where the sheath is entering the artery, not where the sheath is entering the skin, okay? So once they have their green dot lined up precisely, the band will be Velcroed. Excuse me. The band will be Velcroed. 18 cc's of air will go into the band. That's the max amount of air that the band can hold. Every patient starts off with 18 cc's. Once 18 cc's is reached, the physician will remove the sheath, and then they're going to take their syringe, connect it to the port, and remove 1 cc of air at a time while constantly visualizing their space right here until they see a flash of blood. Once they see a flash of blood, the physicians in their procedural room will add 1 to 2 cc's of air back into the band to get the bleeding to stop. And that's a key piece of information that's going to be coming to you. How much air was left in the band? It's going to vary from patient to patient. I would say generally they lay between like 11 and 14 to 15. But again, it's going to vary from patient to patient whether or not it was an interventional procedure versus diagnostic, as well as the sheath size. So you're going to find out, you're going to know how much air was in the band and at what time that air was placed. Those are your two big pieces of information. When the patient's still in the procedural room and when they first get to you for recovery, I like to recommend taking a pulse oximeter and putting it on their patient's thumb or index finger while the band is inflated. Once you have the pulse ox on, if you could occlude the ulnar artery either below or above the band. You want to do this because the point of this band is to achieve patent hemostasis. You want to be hemostatic to the arteriotomy, but you want your radial artery to be patent this entire time. Otherwise, I could just hold about 20 minutes of pressure on here, but I would be occlusive to my radial artery. So it's really important that this radial artery is patent. Once you occlude the ulnar, you'll probably see some type of very dampened waveform, but that's proof to you that the radial artery is receiving flow. So that way, if the patient starts complaining to you about like any numbness or tingling, you can know right away that that's most likely not a flow issue. So once you've established flow, the patient is going to be there anywhere between 1 hour to an hour and a half before you start removing some air. I would recommend an hour for a diagnostic and then an hour and a half for interventional procedures, because generally during interventional procedures, they're going to receive some type of heparin and or blood thinner. So elongating the removal for interventional procedures is a little bit more beneficial. What you're going to do is, I'm going to put this on the model. I'm just going to put some air in here. Okay. So there's about 10 cc's of air in here, and the patient had this placed on at 12 p.m. Just a diagnostic procedure. So now at this point, it's been 1 hour post-procedure. I'm going to come into the patient's room. While looking through this clear plastic plate and visualizing my arteriotomy, I'm going to remove 1 to 2 cc's of air from the band. Now, the big thing I would like to make you guys notice is that this back plunger, if you're not holding it or controlling it, you're going to lose air out of the band. So biggest thing is whenever you're removing air or adding some in, to hold and control the back end of this plunger. So as I was saying, 1 hour post for a diagnostic, I'm going to connect my syringe to the inflator port and remove 1 to 2 cc's of air while constantly visualizing my arteriotomy. And as long as I don't see any bleeding, I'm going to disconnect and come back again in another 15 minutes. Now, if you can't get to the patient in every 15-minute intervals exactly on time, that's okay. As long as we establish that the radial artery is getting flow by putting the pulse ox on, keeping the band on any longer is not going to be an issue for the patient. okay? So I'll come back in again in 15 minutes. I'm going to do the same thing, remove 1 to 2 cc's of air. But if at any point you're removing these 1 to 2 cc's, if you see a flash of blood, I'd like to recommend that you take the syringe and you put that 1 to 2 cc's of air back in. You just want to regain hemostasis, okay? Now at that point, I would elongate my next check. Instead of coming back in 15 minutes, I would come back in 30 minutes just to give that a little bit more time to settle. You should know when the band is empty because we'll have, you should be keeping track of how much air is in the band, but things happen, there's miscommunications, change of shift. So a way to visualize that the band is completely empty is that this balloon port will be completely pancaked right here, okay? Once you've removed your final cc of air, let that sit for like another 10 or a full 15-minute interval before you actually remove the band itself. When removing the band, just note that it is plastic, so it's most likely going to be really sticky to the patient, never mind like any sweat or dry blood that's underneath there. So when going to remove it, I would recommend unvelcroing the band, putting your thumb or your index finger on that green dot, and either rolling it away from you or towards you.